Hello everyone, welcome to Davenant Discussions. My name is Ben Miller. I'm here with Dr. Brad Littlejohn, president of the Davenant Trust. And in this series of videos, we are talking about some of the real-world applications and implications of Davenant's four core ideas: reason, retrieval, engagement, and essentials. And this video is about the applications and implications of retrieval. And we want to talk particularly about the doctrine of the Trinity, because if there is one place where pretty obviously retrieving the work of the historical church is not just helpful to the way we think about God and the biblical revelation of God, it's really essential. And I thought perhaps a place to begin would be for us to talk for a minute about how the early church fathers, who did some of the really early heavy lifting with regard to the doctrine of the Trinity, how did they set some, you've used the term guardrails, some boundary markers beyond which we must not go for all future thinking about the doctrine of God and the doctrine of the Trinity, and then we can explore some ways modern writers have interacted with this.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that when we talk about many doctrines of orthodoxy, really, but I think doctrine of Trinity especially, what we find often in the great theologians of the past is not much of an attempt to give a positive statement of the doctrine, so much as to give, as you say, negative guardrails, to say, we know there's a danger on this side, we know there's a danger on this side, the truth itself is a mystery that we can't plumb very much, and to try to give much of a positive statement of it would quickly go aground. So the task of theology is to tell us what we need to be careful not to say. And obviously when it comes to the Trinity, the church there's quite a number of guardrails there, but one is to say that we cannot be monotheists without qualification. Okay, we clearly the revelation of the Son and then the Son sending the Spirit in history tells us something about who God is. It is not a mere mask that God wears. God presents himself as if he had these three different identities, but in reality he's an undifferentiated monad. Obviously these name real differences within the being of God. And yet, just as emphatically, or perhaps more, I think we will find in the tradition, more emphatically, it is emphasized that we're not tritheists in any sense. We are not, these three do not name three different people, three different agents, three different wills, three different centers of consciousness even. They are three manifestations of the one being of God. And we need to simultaneously, we need to guard it, we need to hold on to both of those guardrails, and how that cashes out in terms of what the Trinity is. Most of the church fathers have said this is where we acknowledge the mystery.
Now, how have some modern thinkers and writers pushed, if not transgressed, those boundaries? And we might think of some particular recent controversies with regard to what is known as social Trinitarianism, or the eternal, what's called the eternal subordination of the Son to the Father. Can you just briefly talk about what those are about?
Yeah, I think what's happened is a lot of theologians have kind of pulled the doctrine of the Trinity off from the shelf and said, sort of dusted it off and said, well, it doesn't seem like we're doing very much with this. It's just sort of been sitting up here on our shelf, and it's an important doctrine. It must be useful, and if it's useful, then it needs to tell us something about practical Christian living, about marriage, about community, about ecclesiology, political theory. And so we've had this whole flowering, to put a positive construal on it, of Trinitarian theologies that are using the Trinity to illuminate all these different aspects of our experience. But of course, what happens there is whatever the plurality within the Trinity is, it's very, very different from creaturely plurality. The difference between between one finite creature and another is we are different agents. Okay, we have different minds, we have different wills, and that is different from the way in which the three members of the Trinity relate. And so when we try to basically inevitably, if we're going to use the Trinity as a way to do anthropology or ecclesiology or whatever, then we're going to make the Trinity, re-narrate the Trinity as kind of three people up there in a community, the eternal community. Which isn't automatically wrong, but it is certainly very different from the way the church has talked about it in the past.
Reasoning from the realm of the creaturely to the creator in a very, very dangerous way.
Yep.
Well, how would you respond when people in these modern movements appeal to biblical text? We're just being biblical after all. Jesus did say, not my will, but yours be done. It sounds almost like two wills, or the head of Christ is God. That almost sounds like a subordination of some kind. How does the tradition help us in working out those kind of biblical texts?
Yeah, well, the way those kinds of texts have generally been read historically is in terms of the human Jesus, and recognizing this is something else we've kind of lost sight of a little bit. There are appropriately, we speak of two wills in the one incarnate Christ. He has the divine nature and will, and the human nature and will. And as a fully human being, he relates to the Father as we relate to God, and he has to pray, not my will, but thy will be done. And the vast majority of what we see in the Gospels is the human side of Christ. And I think our temptation is to read those as shedding light on the inter-Trinitarian relations, and that's certainly not how those texts have commonly been read in the past. Now, again, fresh biblical exegesis can always challenge traditional teaching, but it is important at least to be very aware of when we're doing something different.
Because there is actually a reading of those texts historically, and it keeps us out of tritheism, or two different personalities in God. One final question would just be, though, in fairness, are there any ways where these modern movements do help slightly to sharpen our thinking within the historical tradition, or at least maybe to draw out some of the deep mystery that our fathers acknowledged with respect to the Trinity, especially with respect to the high priestly prayer, where Jesus does in one place say something that doesn't just seem like his own human relating to the Father, but he says he wants his disciples to experience the glory and the love that he and his Father shared before the foundation of the world, seemingly appealing to something in the relationship between the Father and the Son before Jesus was incarnate, that in some way has some kind of relationship to how we relate to each other in the body of Christ. So can we take those things on board in a proper way, still working within the historical tradition?
I think so, and I think there is a long tradition of understanding that the inter-Trinitarian being of God is love. What it means for God to be love is an inherently relational thing, and so to say that God is love means that there is an eternal love between the three persons of the Trinity that is in some way a paradigm for the love that we should have. I just think that what we do need to be careful is we need to recognize that we are in far greater danger, I think, when we try to use the Trinity to say, gives a theology of marriage. We're much more likely to distort and obscure our understanding of God than we are to illuminate our theology of marriage, I think, in the process. Because the discontinuities are greater than the continuities.
So again, no matter how we might need to be careful in articulating our monotheism, we are, as you said earlier, we're not tritheists in any sense, and you be very careful at making that a move that could compromise that.
Exactly. And I think if we think in terms of two guardrails, that's the guardrail that the modern church is kind of misplaced.
Yeah. Very helpful and something we need to think a lot more about. So thank you.
Thank you.